Welcome to the cross in the desert, speaking hope and freedom to Iran. My name is Randy Noble, and I'm very glad that you've taken out a few minutes to spend time listening to my message. I hope you've had an incredibly good week. It's been good here for myself as well. I started a series last week based on this incredible life-changing book that I just finished reading by my two Facebook friends, Miriam and Marzieh. It's called Captive in Iran. And for the last couple of weeks, they have been very busy ladies on various media outlets, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Voice of America, Washington, D.C., bringing the message, their message being a voice for the voiceless, to those suffering in the underground church in Iran and in prisons all over the world. Last week we explored the theme, what we can learn from the book Captive in Iran, and how the church can be better ministering to the hurting and broken. For 259 days, Miriam and Marzieh were locked in Evin prison with many, many other prisoners in a woman's ward. And in the women's ward, they spent their 259 days evangelizing, reaching out, ministering, praying, and sharing the love of Christ with many, many broken people. Just an amazing, amazing book that I highly recommend. We talked about how the church can learn from them last week, and this week I want to pick up on a very, very important theme, the central theme of the message that Miriam and Marzieh are carrying all over the United States, and that is being a voice for the voiceless. What do I mean? Those that don't have maybe the luxury of a lot of media attention, some do and some don't, but those that are locked away, being tortured, ridiculed, and persecuted for their faith in Evin prison. And we're going to talk about that heart of being a voice for the voiceless this week on the cross in the desert. You know, the scripture says in Proverbs 31, verse 8, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed." And so you and me have a responsibility, like Miriam and Marzieh, to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, to be a voice that is for the voiceless. Just recently, based on their book tour, I wrote a blog which bears the theme of tonight's program. It's entitled, "No One Hears Our Voices." And I'd like to quote from a very young activist lady, a friend of Miriam and Marzieh's. Her name is Shabnam Madazadeh. Shabnam is an Iranian activist lady who just a few years ago sent a special letter to the UN rapporteur about the human rights violations in Evin prison. And one of the quotes that stands out from this very brave lady, Shabnam, she says, "No one hears our voices. We scream about our deprived rights. We scream so that someone hears our voices." Let me tell you something about the theme of tonight's program, being a voice for the voiceless. During World War II, a very brave German theologian became an activist. He sought to have Hitler killed. That may be a problem for us as Christians, but he was a very brave man who, because he had a plot involved to do away with Hitler, he was eventually caught by the Germans and later hanged or executed. One of the most incredible quotes that comes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and Lutheran martyr, is, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." A very important quote about the theme of tonight's program from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. My dear brother, Saeed Abedini, is in prison, in Evin prison in Iran, a place that Miriam and Marzieh knows all about. He is suffering from internal bleeding. He is hurting. He is standing firm for Jesus Christ. He is being a witness. But do we comprehend and know what it's like to be in Evin prison? Do we understand, for those that don't have the media attention, what it's like to try to survive there? Well, in my blog, I wrote this. Imagine yourself in a crowded, dirty prison cell where you can't use the toilet until the guards decide to respond to your call. Imagine being subjected to long hours of psychological interrogations, beatings, and threats of execution if you won't recant your faith. Imagine being sick without proper medical attention for several days. You are doubled over with stomach cramps from rotten food, infections, sickness, and disease that has invaded your prison cell, and months pass by before you can even have legal representation. Can you imagine, can you and I possibly imagine this kind of hideous suffering? Well, Miriam Rostampor and Marzieh Amazeda didn't imagine this. They had lived through it. My dear friends are on their busy Captive in Iran book tour, sharing their powerful testimonies about their sufferings in Evin prison and how God used their captivity for 259 days to reach out to the hurting and broken with the gospel. On the Sean Hannity radio program, Miriam passionately explained that their main purpose behind the many media speaking engagements is to be a voice for the voiceless, of those still suffering in Evin prison that don't have the luxury of being seen and heard. And they're an incredible pair of young, courageous ladies. I'd like to quote tonight from their book, a very important quote. Miraculously, after they were gaining their freedom, and this to me is just a very important quote because it talks about their heart, and they have a heart for the voiceless. And I'd like to read from page 268. I feel we can learn so much from them. And this is what they said after being released from Evin prison. Though my body was free, my soul and spirit were still with our precious friends, suffering terrible injustice inside Evin prison. This thought made it impossible for me to enjoy our new situation. I felt strangely indifferent to our liberation. So Marzieh is saying very directly, we're free. We're out of this prison. But my heart, our hearts, are still with those suffering in Evin prison. What a heart of love and compassion they have. We can learn from this spirit, from this love and compassion, to be a voice for the voiceless. One of their best friends that was executed shortly after their release, her name was Shirin Hooley. Shirin Hooley, just a few days before her execution, managed to get a letter out to the media describing the conditions of her imprisonment and the way she was treated. And I would like to read just a couple of quotes that she mentioned in her prison captivity. Shirin graphically described in a translated letter the brutal treatment that she had been subjected to as a prisoner. Shirin described being tied to a bed and being beaten with electrical batons, cables, and then kicked in the stomach until she fell unconscious from internal bleeding. On one occasion, the interrogators left her alone to think about the questions they were asking her and stopped for prayer time. When they returned from prayer, the beatings continued. And she graphically described the brutal treatment that she was subjected to. I can think of so many people in Evin prison right now. Saeed, my dear brother. Farshid, another Christian. Shabnam. Nazarene Satuda. Behera Hadayat. We have an opportunity to be a light for them, to be a voice for them. And it begins by getting involved in writing letters, speaking out, and praying. I'd like to just show you some pictures of who I'm talking about here in this brutal prison that we're sharing about tonight. And this is a picture inside, I think, of a women's ward in Evin prison, if you can see it. This is another picture of the outdoors in the wintertime of Evin prison in Tehran. This is my dear brother, Saeed Abedini, and his lovely wife, Nega Saeed, suffering for his faith in Evin prison. And this is a picture of Farshad Fathi, a Christian, a dear brother, suffering for his faith in Evin prison. A leading women's activist, Behera Hadea, and her husband here, Amin. She too speaking out for the rights of women suffering in Evan prison. The list can go on and on of those that are suffering there. You and me have a responsibility. You can come to my Facebook page, Randy L. Noble. There are petitions on my page. There are articles and letters from prisoners on my page. There are pictures and stories. You can begin by coming to my page and praying for them. There's an opportunity right now with Saeed, SaveSaeed.org, to write a petition and also write a letter for him. You will get those letters. They are going to be delivered from those affiliated with the ACLJ, the American Center for Law and Justice. You can get involved like Miriam and Marziah. They didn't talk only about their suffering, they talked about those who suffered there. And my dear friends just spent a week in Washington, D.C., and they had an opportunity, an amazing opportunity, to talk with those in power. This is a picture of Susan Johnson Cook. She's an ambassador at large for international religious freedom. And this is Miriam and Marziah with Susan Cook in Washington, being a voice for the voiceless. You can do this too. You can get involved too, as I mentioned, by coming to my Facebook page. It's so important that you and me do this because we have a responsibility. Remember what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. If we have a heart of love and compassion for those still suffering there, we can make a difference in their lives, first by praying and then by speaking out." I really felt the most important part of Miriam and Marziah's book tour was their time they spent in Washington, speaking to elected officials, getting on Voice of America, speaking to the Persian people, speaking to their loved ones in Iran, speaking about those that are still suffering. They had a great opportunity, and you and me have the same opportunity. What we're learning from Captive in Iran is our responsibility as being a church, to be amongst the hurting and the broken, to step out of our comfort zone. And this week we're learning we have a responsibility. We have a voice. We can speak for those who are unable to speak really for themselves. Those who are trapped behind bars that are suffering every day. To speak up for the persecuted church. To speak up for the hurting. They have rights as human beings. And they need someone to be their voice. And I go back to the scripture I began the program with. Proverbs 31 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed." I have learned so much from this book, Captive in Iran. I highly recommend that you spend some time reading it and learning the lessons that I've learned from this book. What an amazing, amazing ladies Miriam and Marziah are. Remember, if you want to get involved in being a voice for the voiceless, please come to my Facebook page, Randy L. Noble. You can friend request me, and I'll be glad to be your friend. But most importantly, come to my page. It's filled with notifications about those suffering all over the world in Iran. I also have an alternate page you can go to learn about the persecuted Christians in the underground churches all over the world, and that is Pray for the Persecuted Church International, and that is my alternative page you can come to. It has been a pleasure talking about such an important subject tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the time you've spent with me on The Cross in the Desert, and it is an opportunity now for you to do what Miriam and Marziah have done, and that is start today to become a voice for the voiceless. God bless you. I will see you next week on The Cross in the Desert, speaking hope and freedom to Iran. Good night.